All right. Welcome to Overvolted, I believe number 27. We are here with Donnie and Alex, and we have our special guest, Dr. Ian Cutress, with us. Thank you for joining us, guys. Let's go ahead and give it to Alex. He's going to be driving our conversation today. So go ahead and take us away.
I guess we can kind of open on what got you into the industry, how long you've been doing this.
Right, guys, how's it going? So what you really want to do is get your CPU. No, real voice this time. So what got me into this industry? I guess like most people, I enjoyed gaming. Build first PC, proper first build, I guess around 2005.
Okay.
At university, second year of university, I had only had laptops up to then. Build first PC, spend all of my student loan money, as you do.
Mm-hmm.
So I can
As
go
they
to
still
LAN.
do.
So I can go to LANs and play Battlefield 2 and sold that. And this is a time before you had mobile phone signal data on your mobile phone. So everybody had to make sure they had the right Steam version before they went to the location that didn't have internet. That was terrible. But yeah, kind of through that, I got into overclocking.
Okay.
As you do, just to get, extra performance. Back when Aqua Mark III was kind of standard, right?
Oh, wow.
That was, and you have that end scene where it's a massive overdraw. And back then, the whole benchmark would take, a good 3, 4, 5 minutes. And nowadays, it's 20 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, through that, I was doing that kind of, through my university work, joined British UK overclocking forum, joined that team. I did to be, with some like-minded lads, actually going into the overclocking leagues where we'd buy, random, this is stupidly old Celerons, and let's see how far we can push them or what have you. Back in the days when i7 920 was, king of the hill,
Mm-hmm.
quad core Nehalem. And through that, I went to that was about the time when Gigabyte was doing these global overclocking events where they would go to different regions and you'd have overclocking battles and they'd pick the best. And I physically went to a couple of those not as a participant, more as a, just to see
Spectator.
what goes on. Yeah. And I actually kind of did journalism for one, for the forum I was on, just taking loads of pictures and describing what was going on. Through that forum, and actually at that event, I met Rajinder Gill,
Okay.
who is a known overclocker. He knows all of his stuff, but he's kind of more in the background. He was at that time he was working for Anantech as the senior motherboard editor, and he'd see me write on the forums. That was when I'd do deep dives into which drivers were the best for which benchmarks. You're dealing with Catalyst 7.12 or 7.11 or 7.10. That really shows you how long ago it was. And he says, look, you know how to write and stuff, and you got the technical knowledge, and you clearly know. So why don't you come write for Anantech? So at the time, I'll be honest, I didn't know anything about tech media. I'd never read Anantech in my life. If I wanted to find out what the best GPU was, I'd go to Tom's Hardware and look at the
Oh, wow.
hierarchy, right? It was
That's insulting.
it wasn't even, I didn't look into computer architecture. That I didn't understand that there were generations of this thing. I just saw, oh, that benchmark higher, buy that one if I had the money, or overclock this one to get that performance, that sort of thing. That got me into sort of being like the secondary motherboard editor at Anantech. And 6 months later, Raja quit. And Anand just turned around and said, do you want to be senior motherboard editor? So within 6 months, I was already a senior editor. That was right at Sandy Bridge launch as well. That's the review that Anand did 5 months early, before launch, because he got one of the early engineering samples.
I remember reading that review, actually. That was right
It's
around the
still-
time I built my my Phenom dual core system. I was like, I'm not going to be able to afford this.
But he published that review, 5 months early, whatever. So many more BIOS updates and actual retail silicon before the actual launch day came out. But at that time, I turned senior motherboard editor while I was still doing my studies. I went, so I was, kind of doing 1 or 2 reviews a month because motherboard reviews take such a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I got invited to Computex at ECS that year. So ECS sponsored our trip. And that was kind of like my first proper event. And Computex Taiwan is amazing. If we weren't all in this situation, I'd highly recommend that if anybody gets an opportunity to go to Computex, if they're in the industry, is just go. First year is going to be what's all this then, and then after that, you can perhaps be more professional and actually target where you need to go. Because I think that first year I had like 25 meetings, and now when I go I have like 52. I just bulk it out because I know what to expect. But yeah, then I finished my studies, finished my PhD, tried for 6 months to get a job in chemistry. So my PhD is in computational chemistry. I even applied for a second PhD. There were so many rejections. And in the end, I just decided, well, I'm already doing this freelance motherboard reviewing stuff. Why not? Let's see if I can do it full time. Because at that point I was being paid per article, right? Mm-hmm. And when you decide to make it a full time, you actually realize, oh no, I have to do 4 or 5 reviews a month. Make sure there's budget to do it, because some places don't have the budget for. If you output that amount, they won't pay you that amount because they can't afford it. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I kind of did that. I essentially made that my job for 5 years. I was freelance. And Anand left. We got taken over by a publisher known as Perch, and I was then brought on full time. And yeah, I think after about 2 or 3 years, I had started to migrate from motherboards to CPUs. And then, when Anand kind of made that conscious decision to leave, he was palming off all of his separate areas. So even though I have no formal computer architecture or programming training, most of what I learn is through inference. So if I can read it a few times, I'll pick it up. I'll try and do the pattern matching to understand how it all goes together. I actually did a course on CUDA back when it was CUDA 2.0. That was actually forming the basis of my PhD. So yeah, that is my only formal programming training I've had ever. And then since I got made full time on the CPUs, that's all I've done. And going full time from freelance is weird, because rather than having to chase so many articles a month to make sure you can still pay the rent, you start to think more big picture about the industry as a whole, about where the industry is going, about the bigger articles that matter. And through that, I've looked after a number of junior editors, and it's where I sit now. Senior CPU editor, have editor in chief Ryan Smith. And Ryan Smith. And April last year, I started my YouTube channel. Questions?
Which, if you guys wanna check that out, it's
I actually
Tech Potato.
I have a question. With all of that, and being the senior editor for CPUs at AnandTech, which is obviously one of the most prestigious websites for hardware reviews on the internet as it is, what made you decide to start a YouTube channel?
So AnandTech, for all its exposure, it's a very professional outlet. There's very targeted audience in mind, and I really like the way that we do take the engineer's attitude to a review rather than say the enthusiast's attitude to a review. But there have been a few times over the years where I've pitched an idea for an article and I've been told that doesn't really fit in with what we're trying to do. Something that I find interesting, but perhaps doesn't necessarily work on the scope of AnandTech. And it got to a point where obviously I was seeing everyone on YouTube who are successful in the tech space, thinking, well, can I get a piece of that as well with my own gig and with my own idiosyncrasies? And I obviously have a lot of opinions on a lot of stuff that I write, but that you can't put down in written format. They work much better in a video context. Sure. Just the intonation of how people speak in an interview, for example. So, so that means I did that in order to be my more creative outlet, I guess, for the more casual topics in the industry. or just general, scientific kind of coverage. So I recently did one on optics and video on optics and lenses, which wouldn't necessarily be general AnandTech content. I've done a few videos on how to run Crysis on a 64-core CPU. That wouldn't be AnandTech content. In one video, I was throwing CPUs across the room to show how crap they were. That isn't AnandTech content. So you kind of get that idea. There is a sort of co-design with some AnandTech content. So if I do an interview, I'll have the written version on AnandTech and have the video version on my channel. Just because AnandTech doesn't really do video, want to keep it a more sort of written context outlet. Or I reviewed a Lenovo P620 workstation, the Threadripper Pro. I did the written review on AnandTech. I did a video review on Tech Potato. And yeah, sort of those general things. As we were talking before this all started with these fancy glasses.
Yeah. Don't want to cut you off, but it does appear that we have momentarily lost Alex.
Which is why the video overs are kind of messed up at the moment, but
yeah,
we can keep going until Alex jumps back in.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that was about. Probably just a internet issue. So I think the next topic on the list was pretty much about like how you approach benchmarking and like things like unconscious bias and what goes into selecting your benchmarks. Like,
I'm getting a repeat through. Sorry.
Okay.
Here we go. No, it's because I had the stream on. Yeah. So
I got disconnected. Sorry, guys.
Benchmarking and unconscious bias. So, I mean, the topic of benchmarking is really broad about what makes a good benchmark, what you should be benchmarking, how you should benchmark. I mean,
we've talked about it, privately a couple times about how the kind of benchmarks that you select can definitely change the way that your review looks, and you kind of need to be aware of what you are benchmarking. And if you are either trying to find, to me at least, the way I look at it is if you are trying to sort of hit a certain type of audience with a certain type of workload, if you're trying to simulate, something that you think is broad or generalized, or if you're trying to, try to hit things that are popular or things that are intensive, and you kind of get really different results and then different conclusions from the way that you test.
Well, so think of it as sort of like a push-pull strategy, right? It's if you want to review for your audience, then your audience is dictating your benchmark strategy, right? If they're interested in real-time strategy games and Photoshop, then that's going to be the core of your benchmarking. Then you've also got the other way. You say, well, this is a new product from the manufacturer, and they claim X percentage speed up in various different tests. Now, perhaps those tests now form the basis of your benchmarking. You're validating the manufacturer's claims.
Yes.
Yeah. So you've got an element of push and pull. One of the issues that I think people get hung up on when they start doing this sort of testing is, do I build my own tests? Are my own tests relevant? Or do I use off-the-shelf tests? And the ones that do one button click, are they the best tests because they're the easiest to run? It's Geekbench is the ultimate example of a one button test that just pops out a number, and you may not understand what's being tested underneath unless you actually go and do that research. And it comes down to if you're just a freelancer doing an odd review, or you're trying to churn them out quickly, maybe you're not necessarily paying attention to that in-depth information of what's going on. Or if you're trying to do the sort of 20, 30, 40-minute videos, 10,000 word reviews, then maybe you're doing more upfront research into that. I mean, say take SSD reviews, for example. You can either run Crystal Decimark and Atto and call it a day, or you can look into recording SSD traces and see how it performs in database workloads, and whether your database workload is representative of real world and power management, and if power management features are enabled. That there's a whole range of spectrum of benchmarking ability in that. But you also have, I work for a publisher called Future, Future has a lot of brands like TechRadar, and TechRadar's attitude is actually towards fewer benchmarks because they're pulling audience more out of Google. So they're very low technical knowledge. What benchmarks do they need to run, if any, and how do they explain them to the readership? I mean, I think we've discussed before about sometimes your benchmarking and your attitude defines the audience which you'll get, right? You can help define your audience by defining your benchmarking strategy. So,
I mean, yeah. So, a good example of this, you brought up Crystal Disk Mark and ATTO.
Yep.
I use those in my own SSD tests because, to be completely honest with you, I spoke to a decent number of my audience, and they really didn't seem to care. They just wanted a number to spit out so they know whether the new Samsung SSD is faster than, the Crucial one or whatever. And they again, I looked at it and I said, well, writing here, are my audience a bunch of people who work in data centers or really care about the really in-depth stuff? Or are they going to read a graph like like you guys do, or what's his name used to do? Alan used to do a PC per, and just look at this and go, what am I looking at?
Yeah, I mean, so an Antec's audience. Yeah, it's the engineers, it's the people who work at the companies, it's the people who are making the purchasing decisions for their business. They're trying to eke out every 2% of performance that they can. And that's kind of the audience we go for, and I try and teach our writers to also write for everybody else as well. So alongside the complex testing, we also do ATTO. We don't do Crystal Disk Mark, but we test different Q depths, and it's that sort of attitude to testing. It's all different types, and this is why I always recommend, an Antec isn't, or Potato isn't the be all and end all of benchmarking, right? Different people do lots of different testing, and everybody will have different reviews and different perspectives. No two people are going to get the same result because their setups are different. There's no standardized setup, if you were.
Especially when you get people in your comment threads telling you that they have the same test system as you, but they get 20 FPS more, like that's some sort of W or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you do have people that clamor over every FPS like it's gold.
Well, the interesting thing too is sometimes you'll have people who have an overclocking competition with you in the comments, and it's like, well, I'm sure if I really, really, really tried, I could get those extra FPS, or I could get something that's bench stable, but I don't think that's really an accurate representation to the audience.
But
I don't know how much my audience is going to spend 6 hours making sure, tweaking an overclock to make sure it's stable, or 10 or 15 or whatever.
Stable in CSGO, mind you.
Well, I mean, it's back when I was an overclocker. That's what I did. Right? It's it's fun
to do
when you have the time. Yes.
When you have the time.
when you have the time, when it's your own system. If you're into that, Gordon Maong and Brad Charkos over at PC World, they recently did their weekly show, The Full Nerd, and they were talking about all the different types of testing that people do. So from my perspective, I test at default standards. So that means my memory is at the maximum rated manufacturer. From these days it's now DDR4 3200, cache latency 22, because that's the standard. I run the motherboards at stock, and that's kind of we're trying to find the standardized element of testing, because I'm an engineer, I'm writing for engineers, they want the standards. Whereas Gordon and their team, they'll do a good market representative memory kit, which is technically overclocking.
So
Steve from
3600 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, 3733 cast 15 or whatever. Yeah. Something like that. Whereas Steve from Gamers Nexus, I almost said Hardware Nexus then. Gamers Nexus, he'll go through each individual subtiming and tweak for a good optimized version of the system. I mean, it's I remember going to a Samsung SSD launch here in the UK, and I had an argument with one of the other press because I said, "Why would you test like that? Well, almost nobody runs it like that." And he turned around and said, "Well, yeah, but that we're going after that 1% of the 1% of enthusiasts with our content." I was like, "Okay, fair enough. Do what you want."
So, interestingly enough, I once got into I wouldn't say it was really like an argument, but sort of a discussion with a rep from a certain company because I tested Ryzen Gen 1 at a stock setting, which was JEDEC standard timings, which was, it didn't look that good. I'm going to be totally honest with you. And then I did an overclocked test with the memory clocked up to, I think it was 2800 or whatever. The memory kit I had at the time was absolutely horrible for it. It was it was
You don't need to mention the brand. They won't be too happy if you do.
It's not the brand. It was Micron memory. Or not Micron memory, the other one.
Well, you've named Micron. They're going to be annoyed now.
But yeah, it wasn't Samsung B-Die. Like anything that wasn't Samsung B-Die on pre-launch Ryzen was just a pain to work with. But I got it up to like 2800 and I overclocked the chip and the performance was great. But, the guy asked me, he's like, "Why'd you test that?" I said, "Because that's out of the box settings. When you plug this thing in, if you don't know any better and you don't turn on XMP, because the amount of people I've seen that don't have their memory at XMP settings is like mind-blowing."
Or if they build a computer and both memory sticks are in the same channel. Yeah. I mean, it's the whole XMP issue is something that comes across regularly because my argument is when I went to LAN parties in the UK, we have massive LAN parties of 1,500 people. There's a company that does those, and they've been going for like 20, 30 years. I went to a few of them as an overclocker, some of the few overclocking events I actually did. And you'd go around and you'd see people with, they didn't know what XMP was, they weren't running, they'd bought a high performance kit and they were still running it DDR3 2133 or DDR4 2133 and or in single channel mode. And they had no idea because either they hadn't watched a build guide. I'm sure there's enough build guides on YouTube now. But it's still 10
years ago it was harder to find this stuff out though.
Yeah. You had to buy the magazine, and the magazine was like a Haynes manual or something.
Basically. So I have a question about benchmarking.
Sure.
Pretty much since Ryzen came out, they started showcasing gaming while streaming with their chips and how it outperformed Intel. And even since like Ivy Bridge, I've been interested in seeing benchmarks that showed the multitasking features of the 4-core 8-thread versus just a normal i5 or 3. And that's especially important now with Threadripper and things like that. Is there a reason why we haven't seen any multi-application simultaneous benchmarking?
So, I mean, Intel has an official word for this. It's called megatask.
Yes.
I was going to say that, yeah.
I think they pushed that out in one of their high-end desktop launches. They called it megatasking.
I think was Ryan Trout over there at the time? Like, I mean, I know he's there now, but was he there yet?
I think it was slightly before that.
Okay.
But so as always with testing, you want repeatability. So I did once write an automation script, which would essentially launch OBS and start streaming to a Twitch or a YouTube or whatever, and it would just instantly go. The minute you started up, it would get what's on screen. I'd set up the scene profile and whatever, and then minimize it, and then you could say run your gaming benchmark or whatever's running behind me here on top of it. And you could think, well, isn't that pretty repeatable? And the annoying thing is, anytime you go outside of your network, you never know what's going on, right? So if somehow during that test you had, frames drop or signal degradation, that you weren't streaming at 3500 kilobit, you were streaming at 2000 kilobit or something, that puts less pressure on the CPU to do the encoding. Because the server's telling you, back off, I can't deal with your stream right now, or your signal integrity is so poor, I can't deal with your stream right now. So you end up with a variable load on the CPU, or the GPU if you're doing GPU encoding, if you're doing NVNC and firing that down the pipe.
You could offset that by just having it record locally rather than actually streaming. That way you have actual video encoding going on.
You have video encoding, but you don't have the network load. And network load is also another CPU load. So
but it's
a tricky one, actually.
It's a trade-off.
Yeah, and it's unfortunately people want the latter. It's the same with benchmarking MMOs. Whether they're RPGs or Battle Royale or what have you, it's you can't guarantee anything that comes up and down the pipe unless you have like an internal LAN setup.
There is situations with some of them that have replay systems where you can play the replays. PUBG is one of them.
There's a problem with replays.
Okay.
So I once. So funny story. So my brother works for a video game company, and we went to a video game event in London. He was working. I decided to get a press pass because I thought, why not? Let's have a look. And part of what I do when I go to these things is I kind of poke companies for interesting things. And have you got a benchmark? So
why don't you have a benchmark? Is always
why don't you have a benchmark?
After. Yeah.
And try and convince them do this, and it'll look good. And I met the rep for Bossa Games, who does all the surgeon simulators, right? And I had a talk with him, and I think it was actually, like the COO or something. And him, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that's a really good idea. You should come down to our office in Shoreditch or wherever it was, which is in North London." And I went, "Okay, sure." And a couple of weeks later, I put on my suit as I do, and I went over to there, and I had a play of their surgeon simulator game. And at that point, they had a Trump model, and they let me play it in VR, and it was fun. And we had to sit down, we had a talk about what games they were working on, and how much effort they were putting in. And we broached the topic of replays, and he says, well, we have this software that enables a replay system, and we use it for validating hardware on our game. And I said, well, great, how does that work? And it turns out it doesn't actually do the physics math.
Well, it's already got all that saved.
Yeah, it's already done.
Compute it.
The playback file is just a list of locations to move elements to. It's not actually. So do you remember the first version of Worms on DOS?
No.
Kurt, please say you do.
Yeah, I didn't play Worms. I played the one that was Tanks that Worms was based off of.
Right.
How about that?
So Worms, as you know, does a replay whenever you kill a worm, right? Shows the shot and does everything. Worms' original DOS, when it did a replay, it redid the math. And because an element of the math is random number generation, sometimes you'd get a different random number and not kill the worm. Or he would move slightly differently, right? I mean, that's the problem with random numbers, and you can talk about mathematical precision as well would become an issue with that. But yeah, so replays, I don't like replays like that.
That's a fair critique.
I mean, you could argue that in-game benchmarks can be replays. Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, unless the developer tells you, and in my experience, developers do not want to talk to people who benchmark hardware, you won't know.
Yeah, Alex and I have discussed this, and we've both come to the conclusion that especially for CPU reviews when you're testing games, canned benchmarks are almost useless. Like,
I use exclusively canned benchmarks. Sorry,
I know you do.
I was going to say,
for the one you wrote,
but I'm sure you've probably curated a list that are actually working the way you want. I just mean, like, if you're just specifically trying to go for the popular games or something like that, it's very difficult to get an accurate representation of the experience a user is going to get in a canned benchmark if you're testing a CPU. Graphics cards, there's a little bit more leeway.
I could argue that as long as you're only comparing products in that review and you're not comparing the results to other reviews, then you're fine.
No, yeah. See, there's two different ways of looking at this, and this is what I was kind of wanting to get into in benchmarking. There is trying to show you what X piece of hardware does in Y piece of software, and then there is trying to compare two pieces of hardware against each other. So, for example, if you were trying to tell someone what performance is in X, Y, and Z games generally. The CAN benchmark can be kind of iffy in that, depending on the situation. And again, when you're trying to look at it from sort of the Ryzen chip and the Intel chip in these handful of testing, in these handful of games, which one is faster? It's generally, I think, acceptable.
Well, so I mean, you guys know that I essentially do automate all of my testing.
Yeah.
I mean, like I say, we went through both systems behind me.
Yes.
You know, I'm doing work while these guys are on a stream talking. So that does limit me to benchmarks I can reliably automate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and canned benchmarks are the best source of that.
And they're incredibly consistent. That is another thing.
Well,
they are incredibly consistent.
Gears Tactics has its issues. The company knows about it. They don't care.
Yes, it does.
So I once did I have automated a non-canned benchmark before, and that was Rocket League.
Mm-hmm.
So my automation tool started up the program, initiated a four-way a game with bots, as many bots as you could fit in, played a 5-minute match, and then did fraps over the top. I think we lost Alex again.
Yep.
So it did fraps over the top to get your frame rates, and the idea was I made the match long enough to be representative, because you can't have a deterministic game like that because of AI and what have you. But as long as you made the benchmark long enough, you should get a representative overall average. We're talking, tens of thousands of frames. You're hoping that everybody hopes that over the lifetime of you playing a game, your frame rate should average out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's why benchmarks produce numbers, because you want the global average. So that was always my argument there for doing the Rocket Lake test. But then, as always with these games, if you automate them, they update, and that screws up your test. And it's usually right before a launch. And you have to figure out what went wrong, how to fix it. And in the end, Rocket League just changed too much. It's Rocket League, when it first came out, did have proper command line tools to do all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't need to do fake mouse movements and button presses. But now there's an issue. So
that is the unfortunate reality of benchmarking, is software changes on a daily basis now. It's even as when I'm not reviewing and I'm just playing a game, the amount of times that I'll just start Call of Duty Modern, like the Warzone, I guess it's called, and every time I get in there, there's an update, and it's like, how much is changing? It gets a little annoying. I realize that, on one hand, that's a good thing, because it means they're looking after the community and making sure the game doesn't have any bugs. But on the other hand, it's just waiting for updates is always a pain in the ass.
So it because of my automation, if I can, I try and obtain the GOG version, the DRM-free, non-updatable version. So my editions of Civ 6, I think, and Chernobylite both use the GOG versions because they're non-updatable. And when I come around to refreshing my test bench, which is usually once every 18 months to 2 years, that's when I'll do the software update.
Right.
It's a bit harder with GPU reviews because you always want to test on the latest drivers, on the latest everything. So it means you have to retest everything. My ultimate goal is, if I can automate everything and I can scale out, I can test, 10 CPUs at once, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's when I have my office set up, I can do 5, 6 simultaneously, which is fine. But then even just maintaining them is a full-time job, because you start them up, then one finishes, okay, you change the GPU, and then you start that test.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next one finishes, you got to change the GPU, put it on the test. And then by the time you've changed the last one, the first one's done. And in that, you still have to go through all the data and pass it through your graphs and what have you. It's perfect job for an intern. I wish I had an intern.
When you're this is something I don't know if you've talked about before, but when you're using the canned benchmarks through your automation systems, are
Yeah.
you taking whatever number the benchmark spits out at the end, like, if it's Tomb Raider or whatever, it shows you their results at the end? Or do you capture using an external software like Fraps or what's the other one? PresentMon.
So I prefer using games that do their own output files.
Right.
If it's just an image on a screen, that's difficult. So that means I have to then take a screenshot and then post-process it by going through, picking the numbers out. So my automation tools, if a canned benchmark pulls out a physical file, just a file which has the numbers in, then my script will go through that file, especially if it's frame times. We'll go through the frame times, find the average, find the percentile. In a couple of cases, yes, it is just one number for average. Right. There's a couple of games that I do use Fraps on. So Final Fantasy 15 is one. I can't think of what the other one is. So there's definitely two. And yeah, that gives me a pseudo frame time. Far Cry 5 is an odd one out because it doesn't output an easy to use text file. It outputs a HTML file.
Yeah.
And it generates a graph. So what my script does is it regexes the HTML file to extract the values out of that graph from the code. It uses those as the FPS per second because it only does it once a second on the graph. And through that, I derive an average frame rate and a percentile.
Don't you just love having programming skills?
No, it's doing the same thing repeatedly. That's what I'm good at.
Rainbow Six has a thing when you use their canned benchmark now. It spits out an HTML file.
Yeah, I think
kind of interesting.
Ubisoft is going that way with all their canned benchmarks. They spit out an HTML file.
Are they HTML or XML?
HTML, I believe.
So at the minute, my game testing is only standalone tests and Steam. So the problem with Steam is if you want to test multiple systems at once, you can only be signed on to the one account at a time. What my script does is it actually probes Steam's API to see if my account is online. If it is, it goes through the offline tests, and between each test, it will say, well, can I go online yet? Yes, no. No, okay, another offline test.
This is genius. Guys.
If I can.
I'm pretty sure you could sell this script for a lot of money. It sounds like it's pretty.
It's other benchmarkers in the world who want it.
It's I have had a couple of other media. I have had a couple of other media requests. I'm really bad at taking money from people though. It's like I need somebody. I need a salesperson to do it, and then I'll be fine. But yeah, no, it's I can have it. So if I'm doing like 3 or 4 systems that are running through the gaming script, if I can have one that's currently on the online tests, the other 3 go through the offline tests, but then they spin rounds just every minute checking online to see if they can go online. It's you can't control that. I mean, I could kind of try and scale out to multiple accounts, but that would mean I have to pay for multiple titles.
Yeah.
And then I do at one point hit the 5 activations every 24 hours that some games have, that Ubisoft games tend to have.
You want to just make a separate Steam account for each game that you purchase.
That's
really smart. I hadn't thought of that.
That's really smart.
Can't
do that now because
in
they're
the
all on one
resale
account.
market, you could resell those individual accounts, but don't take don't do that. Steam says you're not allowed to.
Well, actually, in the UK, in the UK, don't you guys have
Right
software laws right to resell laws like there?
I don't know.
Well, if you
the
have
EU does. I don't know if it still counts for you guys anymore.
If you have an account for each game, then you have the right to resell, right?
Yeah. No, it's
EULA says don't, so don't do that. You did not hear it from me.
Steam's good because Steam has a user API. You do have to activate it in your profile in order to get it to work. Whereas none of the other game stores do that. So I can't use Origin, I can't use Uplay unless it is through Steam. And yeah, I also use some undocumented Steam command line tools to actually get it to work, and so I don't have to keep putting in my password.
It's kind of awesome. That's kind of awesome from a point of scale as to how automated this is. It's kind of awesome that you can just let this run in the background. As someone who stands pounding at the keyboard.
Yeah, you need to
there are so many like games that I don't use canned benchmarks in that I just have to play it the exact same way every time.
Yeah.
It gets to the point. There are games that I've wanted to play like actively, like play through the story of them. But then because I started benchmarking, The Witcher 3 is definitely one of them, but Control is another one. Where it's like I've done it so many times just benchmarking it that I don't even want to see the title screen to play it. I want nothing to do with the game. And they're good games. It's just
my script does automatically turn the audio of the OS down to 0, so I don't have to keep hearing the same thing over and over and over again. Well, it's so is it Red Dead Redemption? Is how I've been benchmarking it for so long. I haven't actually played the damn game. Play time 256.1 hours, all benchmarks.
Yep,
all benchmarks.
I've put maybe like 30 hours into it. It's really good, but I do know the benchmark.
Yeah, that's how it is. So it's you guys will know this. Last year, I announced my CPU overload project to test every x86 processor since 2010.
Yes,
about 900 processors. I'm at about.
He's a madman.
I'm at about 100 now after 8 months. But the thing is, I'll go through like a period of 2 weeks where I'll do tons, and then 5 weeks where I do nothing, because I'm too busy writing. I'm too busy making videos. I just don't want to spend time just keep changing processes. But
yeah.
How much thermal paste do you keep around you? Because I keep like a lot. And I don't test as much as you do.
I use about a 20-gram tube a year.
Okay. That's the large tubes.
Yeah.
I know you're wondering. That's like the big ones.
There is one manufacturer who will keep me happily in stock of thermal paste. So
let's see. It's probably this one.
We can't see.
Well, I know you can't, but the people on stream might be able to.
Is that NTH2?
No, Noctua does pretty well at providing stuff, but Arctic actually has sent me MX4 quite a bit too. So
I used to use the MX5 stuff when I was overclocking.
Yeah.
Because that used to be the best of the generation.
Yeah.
Though to be honest, I think I either use H1 or H2, but it wipes off easily with just a tissue. I don't need to use any cleaning agent.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
I do remember that. There was a time when I would, for every GPU review, I'd have to do a teardown and then repaste it. Obviously, I do that after the testing because it can't have it.
Oh yeah. It's I have a golden rule with systems: or do your tests first, then take it apart.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes and not to like call anybody out, but I watch them as a fan. Like I watch Linus Tech Tip videos, and I see them do the teardown first, knowing they did the teardown first. They'll even say, "Yeah, we haven't tested this yet," and I'll be like, "Well, what are you doing? Why are you like?"
It's because they can get
it's making your life more difficult.
They probably got 2 GPUs to begin with.
Yeah.
Well, didn't they just buy 100 to resell?
Yeah, they're doing some kind of thing where they're like selling 3080s direct to gamers or something, right?
Yeah, to help the gamers actually get one.
Eventually, I think Linus Media Group as a whole is going to get so big that they might buy a non-tech next.
From Perch? No.
I don't think Perch even does. Perch still own a non-tech, or is
Future
it
now?
It's Future now.
Yeah, it is Future. Yeah. That's right.
I'm trying to find the thermal paste that Noctua did send me. I think it's the NH2 stuff.
Well, while we're
the newer
thermal
one.
paste, we can talk about
really nice.
Thermal Grizzly as well.
I haven't used their stuff actually.
I didn't find it wipeable enough.
There you go.
I didn't find it wipeable enough. Are we still talking about thermal paste?
Depends on what thermal paste you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, a little bit of isopropyl and you're fine.
One thing I've been interested in is trying those the pad things, those carbon. I forget what they're called. You guys know. Everybody watching knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Like,
somebody said it in the chat like 2 minutes ago. They said that would be the ideal thing for testing, but I suppose so.
No, because it's
also hey, Nomon's in the chat. Hi, Nomon.
I would argue that thermal pads. Okay, you get better consistency. I worry that it's just too much paste to clean every single time. I mean, I'm CPU on, CPU off, CPU on, CPU off, CPU on. So.
Yeah, no, I remember talking to somebody in a forum, and they were talking about what thermal paste they use, and I'm like I use this one, and then they said, well, these ones they dry out quicker, and I'm like I don't keep paste on a CPU.
I use toothpaste.
Wasn't Adantec the one that started doing cheese as a benchmark base, or was it the toothpaste? Oh, cat raiding the screen again.
It's my motherboard reviewer, Gavin Bonshaw. He used to run his own YouTube channel. His best video was where he got 70 different types of paste.
Yep, I read that one.
One of those. It takes like 6 months to actually do properly. That one of those sorts of reviews, and you just put it together, and it was really good.
Right. I apologize to the screen for the sound of the falling microphone. My cat is having.
Linus Tech Tips did one where he put coffee filters, or no, he used coffee filters to wipe them, but he used toothpaste, canned cheese, mayonnaise. Mayonnaise has got to smell awful. That's got to just smell awful.
You need canned tuna.
There we go. Somebody said graphene pads. We just got a super chat from Denvera.
Graphene pads.
Yeah,
graphene pads are different from thermal pads.
I see Diamond. Yeah,
they're completely dry, so you can reuse them and use them on different CPUs.
Some people have told me I should use Rocket Lake to cook chicken.
Just put it in the KF console.
Oh.
Okay,
I asked Cooler Master for a review sample, and they didn't reply to me. So I why they were laughing at me.
Well, don't forget that AData did that semi-solid gold keyboard at CES one year. I asked for a review sample of that, and even I couldn't get one. They said, "Oh no, it's only for show."
Speaking of Linus Tech Tips, they actually recently did an all-gold Xbox controller.
I watched the third video just before coming on here, where they got all the reactions from everybody.
I haven't watched that one yet.
You should. Yvonne really takes him to town on it. The last five. It's a dumb joke, but the last 5 minutes are golden.
I know not everybody likes watching their stuff, or they, a lot of our audience might not feel that they're technical enough or what have you, but they're entertaining. Their stuff is really entertaining sometimes.
They do. They have a good composition.
I almost worked for Linus once.
Oh.
We were talking, but it would require me moving to Vancouver, which I couldn't do. So, he wanted a technical person on staff. Because he's a very smart guy. He fully admits where his knowledge is lacking.
Oh yeah, no, he's not one of the people that pretends that he understands things that he doesn't.
But I
respect him a lot for it.
I've emailed back and forth with Anthony Young quite a fair bit, and that guy knows his stuff. So more, and he's good. He also gets the most love from the audience. It sounds like.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he's very well.
I remember seeing when I first saw him start to pop up in the videos, and I was like, you know what, this is a really good match. He's kind of what they need.
Yeah, for sure.
I've seen Linus popping up in Ubiquity doorbell cam videos and things, little advertisements, and I'm like, I watched his Ubiquity wireless point-to-point video, and I've been tempted to actually do a proper video for something like that technology, because as somebody in the industry, I had a hard time watching that video. It's like, so many wrong things.
To be fair, though,
but it was entertaining, and that was the point, I guess.
Yeah.
I've always told Linus if he knew 5% more, he could explain it 100% better, and he fully agrees with that.
Right.
But it's at least he acknowledges he doesn't know what he doesn't know. Fair play to him.
I remember one of the videos that he did was when he tried to set up Wi-Fi in that warehouse that they had. I think they moved to something different now, or they built up that warehouse a lot. But he like couldn't get the signal, and they like kept breaking the routers over and over again. That was good stuff. That was entertaining. That and the people in the comments who were, like IT people who were very angry at what he was doing. It was great.
It's Linus is one of the people I want to do on my Ian's interview series, because I think one, it'd be an interesting discussion, because like Linus and I, we've known each other for years, we've had dinners together, what have you, and I think I can bamboozle him enough to make it funny, but also make it informative enough that people will think it's good content. Because it'd be a bit different from, say, interviewing, Elisa Sue or whatever,
where it has to be pretty serious the whole way through.
Yeah.
Right.
So, Linus, you're financially stable. What are you going to do for the rest of your life?
What's it like driving a Lamborghini?
I actually have a video of me driving one.
So I mean, onto sort of the thing that everybody is probably already aware of and have read already. But the thing that we kind of have to talk about anyways, that we already kind of covered. Here's the part we got to ask you the gotcha questions about how dare you.
How dare I?
But no, so I mean, you reviewed the i7 11700K. See, I hate these names so much. The 10 series it just doesn't roll off the tongue. You reviewed Rocket Lake, and I mean you showed a lot of interesting things there. The thing that I saw most pop up in the responses were people shocked that there was a regression in gaming performance compared to previous Intel chips. Care to explain to I guess the less technical audience what's going on, and maybe a deeper explanation to the more technical audience?
Right. So the reason we think why that happens, why there's a regression in performance, is due to how the processor core fetches instructions and data from main memory.
Okay.
So when you fetch an instruction, it goes through several layers of faster cache, and if the instruction you need isn't in your closest cache, then you go further out, and then you go further out. And the idea is that as you go further out, the caches are bigger, but they're also slower. Until you get to main memory, where it's like takes 300 CPU cycles to actually get anything from. And you'd much rather have the CPU core doing work than not doing work. So when you design a CPU core, depending on how you've designed the caches, that kind of sort of dictates the speed on how those instructions and data can be fetched and how they can be processed. Now, with Rocket Lake, what we're seeing is a regression in that caching performance. Because while it was good with Ice Lake, which is what the core is based on, but backported to 14 nanometer, there are inherent inefficiencies you have to get around just because of the fact that you have a bigger core. So Intel technically said that they were expecting a 2.7x density increase going from 14 to 10. So if you go from 10 to 14, then your CPU size increases by 270%. Well, not really, but you get what I'm saying. And even though everything is bigger, you might think, well, can't you just put it on a photocopier and make it bigger? It's more complicated than that, because electrons still move at the same speed, right? So you have to put in buffers to manage this extra latency. And that is essentially where we think we're getting extra latency in that cache structure from. So what does this mean for games? if you remember back to Ryzen 5000 launch, AMD's big +1 in its gaming performance was we have a unified L3 cache. It is much bigger. Your effective cache latency, so the average time to fetch an instruction from anywhere in cache or memory, is lower because we have larger caches nearer to the core. Now, the effective cache latency with Intel on Rocket Lake seems to be lower than it is on Comet Lake, the 10th gen part. And as a result of that, that has had a knock-on effect where we're getting at 1080p max either equal or slightly behind in the frame rates. Or if you go down into some of the more stupid resolutions, the 720p lows, you're actually seeing them spread out a little bit more. And you sometimes see the 11700K behind the 10700K because of this regression. Now, there are optimizations that can be had at the software level that could help this. We're still quite a few weeks away from launch, so other things can happen that can help performance. You could see motherboard manufacturers who see this results change their BIOSes to move more frequency into the cache structures, into the interconnect, into the uncore to help make it go faster. Lots of little tweaks that are still yet to be announced that could be made as well. And
people on the internet will say it's your fault and you're wrong if these things change at launch because it's the internet.
So things always change. It's always a question of how much and in which direction.
I mean, Ryzen first gen changed a lot between launch and months down the road.
When Anand reviewed Sandy Bridge 5 months early, it changed a lot between launch. Between that review and launch. When Tom's Hardware reviewed, was it 9th gen? There was some updates between there and then. It's always a question of where, how much, what direction, and why. If you can get somebody to answer the why, then that's always the key metric. So yeah, I mean, people can't really buy these yet. So it's always going to be an ongoing story.
Yeah. So
So it's interesting that you brought up Ryzen 5000 and the cache and concern to gaming. I've heard some really interesting takes that people have had. Some of them are a little odd, and some of them are really well done. One of the ones that I heard that I kind of disagreed with was somebody saying something about how the fact that developers develop games with Intel in mind that has a lower cache system, that really high amounts of L3 cache don't help, which, I mean, like, I can prove that that's not true. Like, you could just look at the performance differences between the different chips. But what do you think is like, here's a better way of putting it. From the understanding that you have from the software side, is there really a point where you can have too much cache?
No. Well, okay. It's
without getting absurd.
So yes. Yeah, if you had a terabyte of level 1 cache,
that doesn't do anything. Yeah,
that doesn't do anything if your game is only 20 gig. But it's so the point is finding a right balance. Because if your cache doubles in size, whether L1, L2, L3, it actually it takes longer to traverse the cache to find the data you want. So Intel with Ice Lake, they increased the size of the L1 cache from 32 kilobytes to 48 kilobytes. Now, it used to be a 4-cycle cache. Now it's a 5-cycle cache because they need the extra cycle to ensure
that they can grab.
Now, it's in some instructions they can do in 4 cycles because that's just how it works. But most, worst case is 5. And when you see these cache latency measurements, it's usually worst case. So it's you have to balance increasing the size of your cache with the latency, and then you also got bandwidth. And there are engineers who literally spend years and years just designing a cache for a CPU for somebody to go play Minecraft.
I think the other thing that people also don't seem to understand is that it's not so easy to necessarily just add more cache. Like, there's a lot that goes into trying to make it all work. You can't just go ahead one day and click the double the cache button
But
or triple the cache button.
It's also floor plan, right? How you design the CPU in 2D. So if your L2 cache suddenly went from 256K to 512K, well, then you've got to find double the space to put it in. Well, if the way your core is designed with all the execution ports and the buffers and the micro-op cache, and if you don't have the physical space to double your L2, then you have to redesign your core in a different way. So, I mean,
I'm assuming unless you can get density changes in smaller nodes,
which we don't see.
I'm just assuming.
If you go to a smaller node, you're doing a new design anyway. So,
yeah,
it's just part of the co-design, and then you're also dealing with the foundry who's making your chip. What are their transistor libraries like? What are their SRAM libraries like? And how does that translate to yield? Because you might use a less dense library, which will help you drive higher frequency. Because the densest libraries, the numbers that we hear, like 100 million transistors per square millimeter, that's literally for the densest transistors. There's actually sub-libraries out for if you want more performance-oriented transistors. And they're, 80 million, 60 million, 40 million. And they all, operate at different voltages and use different amount of powers as well. So it's lots of moving parts. I think Charlie Demersion from Semi-Accurate actually told me a good story once on this. It's like having a box with 1,000 levers, but if you change one, three others shift. So you've got to find the right combination of levers as it affects everything else to find it's local minimization optimization mathematically, but this is also why Intel and NVIDIA and AMD and everybody else goes through A0 silicon and B0 silicon and B1 silicon. Because, if you've ever done any coding, how many times do you press run to see if it makes sure it doesn't fault, right? You only get 4 chances to do that on a modern CPU. You got to choose carefully.
I'm assuming they have some really powerful simulation software that can help with at least some of the physical problems.
Oh yeah.
Right.
It's what are called EDA tools.
Circling back to the,
See this, guys? This is what you don't get from other guests.
No. So circling back to Rocket Lake, in terms of its performance and stuff, as you said, there will be software optimizations to mitigate some of the issues that you think you're seeing there. How much of an impact do you think those will have? Obviously, there's no way to know for sure, but, as an educated guess, I would say. You could argue this 2 ways, right? You could either argue, well, it's a backported Ice Lake, so you're going to get, so it's essentially Ice Lake, and anything Ice Lake already has, you can use that as the point of optimization, and therefore most of the optimizations are already out there. Right. Or you can take it from the point of, well, actually this is a new core design because it's on a different node. So therefore you have all the additional learnings to do from having a new physical design, and they can be optimized for. And you could argue that would give a larger benefit, say, in firmware optimizations. If you're just purely talking about software game optimizations, then it's more likely that anything that was relevant in Ice Lake is just going to be relevant here. So right.
So I wanted to get another Intel topic though off. What do you think about the future of Alder Lake versus Zen 4? I know that's a way off.
What do I think about the future of computing?
Yeah.
So
it's a really vague question, but again, we're talking about moving over to a new motherboard platform for AMD, for Intel as well, I believe.
Yeah.
But AMD is definitely moving over to DDR5.
Has that been confirmed?
Intel, I'm not sure if AMD, I'm pretty sure, is moving to DDR5, and Intel seems like they might be doing a mixed bag again. At least that's what the rumors are saying. And there's a lot of sort of changes that are going to happen?
So most launches where you change DDR, you typically have a generation that supports both.
Mm-hmm.
So with
Like
Skylake,
they did last time.
Well, so Skylake we moved from DDR3 to DDR4.
Mhm.
I literally have a board 5 inches away from me that does both DDR3 and DDR4 for Skylake.
Is it DDR3 or is it DDR low, the laptop RAM?
DDR3L or something. Low power.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. So that was actually an engineering sample board that a vendor sent me because I asked for it about a month before launch.
Okay.
I don't think it ever made it to market. But
yeah, that could totally
aren't
be
they
a
keyed
DDR3
differently?
board.
How is that work?
Yeah, they are. So it had 2 slots for one and 2 slots for the other.
Yeah, it has different memory channels.
Yeah, so I mean, it's
The different memory channels have different.
even the enterprise CPUs, there were some variants that would support both DDR3 and DDR4. You could argue, well, AMD went to DDR4 with AM4, but that's because
it was out for a while.
It was a brand new platform. It wasn't having to support anything legacy, so they didn't need to do double there. They weren't having people moving over that needed support for both.
Although I think even AMD did support DDR2 and DDR3 on the same socket, right?
They did.
Yeah, that was
On the
back
old
in
boards.
AM2, AM3 days. Yeah, because that was the same platform being updated.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The same sorts of architecture. So, you could argue that simply if both are going to DDR5, then both will just support DDR5. But there may be the enterprise stuff might be a bit more varied, I guess.
I also had one of my friends. They told me that they were going to wait for Zen 4 so they can get the DDR4 memory. Or I'm sorry, DDR5 memory. And I was like, I mean, yeah. I'm just gonna give you a bit of warning. He's like, what? Like you're complaining about the pricing that we're having now. GPUs might normalize by that time, but RAM's going to be really expensive.
So, I fully expect that. Remember all the issues we had with memory on Ryzen first gen?
Mm-hmm.
We'll probably have it with DDR5 if DDR5 is coming to market. I mean, it's kind of the right interception point. I'm sure I've reported on it before, but predictions that by the end of the year DDR5 will be about 10% of the market.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot.
But
that is a whole
that's mostly enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones going to move to it first, for sure.
Oh yeah.
For unreleased platforms, probably.
Yeah.
Or hyperscalers
Google and the Amazons of the world.
Well, I mean, if Google gets 1 million Sapphire Rapid CPUs, they're going to need some DDR5 memory, aren't they?
And a small
Yeah.
nuclear base
And that,
run it.
Yeah, and that could easily be 10 worldwide production just going to Google. So, and then at the end of next year, I think they were thinking about maybe it'll be 50-50 crossover between DDR4 and DDR5 because obviously the consumer platforms come in. So put that in your hat when you think about what DDR the next generation will support, right? So if Alder Lake comes out in September for desktop with DDR5, given what I've just said, do you think there'll be any DDR5 in the consumer market?
No.
No, that's actually a really fair point. That's a really fair point.
So do I think Intel is going to come out with Alder Lake in September for desktop?
Okay.
The one thing. So everybody saw the CES demo where Greg Bryant showed off the Alder Lake platform running Windows. If you zoom into the motherboard, it obviously looks like one of their internal motherboard designs with all the extra features that they need for probes. What they didn't tell you is they do that for laptop chips as well. That is what they call a CRB, a consumer reference board or design, and that could easily have a laptop chip in there.
And usually,
and they didn't specify.
Usually
they
with
just said
Intel,
Alder Lake coming. Yeah.
Usually with Intel, their laptop chips will be on the previous memory, like whatever. Even if DDR5 comes out by the end of the year, most Intel laptops are still going to be DDR4 or some version of it. So, I don't know.
Well, I mean, Tiger Lake technically supports LPDDR5.
Does it?
Yeah. Though we haven't got a clear answer whether that is the same silicon or you have to have a different silicon. So, but yes, it's the question of Alder Lake. I mean, I said I'll do a video on my thoughts on Alder Lake, but the high level is I don't think it will come to desktop this year.
I think the adored audience are really big AMD supporters, or AMD buyers, and a lot of people came to the channel because of his videos on Ryzen processors, and
Really, because all you can see behind me is Intel and NVIDIA.
But
to be fair,
I wanted to
we
ask
can't
you.
tell what CPUs those are just by the video.
Yeah, no, we can't tell the CPUs. We can see I could see the Founders Edition. Like, I could tell it's a Founders Edition card. But
I have to hide that when I have a meeting with AMD.
You just throw a drape over it.
I wouldn't see why they use NVIDIA cards in their testing too. Or at least they did.
I put special boxes in front.
Oh, wow, that's rude.
No, in front of the card, not in front of me.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, sorry, to your question.
One of the for the question. So a lot of people are curious as to how much Zen 4 will be able to improve performance.
Whether we're topping out at IPC or something.
I mean, I'm just curious as how much you think they have to go with this architecture without how much of a redesign do you think this is?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, going from Zen 2 to Zen 3, while it's Zen, it's AMD said, well, look, we completely redesign the core, fresh sheet of paper, round up. Some comments as to, well, actually, is what Jim Keller thought it would be from when he started, right? This is what he put to paper. Because what they've been able to do with the execution ports and splitting out, doing loads and stores independently, and doubling areas of performance by just managing that level. Going forward, usually a big driver on this, if you're not specifically going for IPC, is smaller process nodes. So who knows what Zen 4 is going to be on. But if there's more transistor budget, you can expect to see more accelerators designed to help improve encoding, crypto. No, not that sort of crypto.
AES.
Just AES. So funny thing, SHA-256, another crypto algorithm. AMD has an accelerator. VIA has an accelerator. Intel has only just got an accelerator, and it's called the AVX 512 unit. So it's very power hungry as well.
So wait, VIA?
So in some of my benchmarking, I have an 8-core VIA CPU on SHA-256, absolutely trouncing 10-core Intel, 28-core Intel processors.
All right. Now you've given some of the comment section some ammo to yell at Intel fans now.
Well, no, because Intel now have that acceleration, so.
Fair enough.
An AVX 512, which AMD doesn't have yet, right?
Well, yeah, it's. So the whole thing about AVX 512, it's, AMD hasn't been too committal on it. It's like they kind of see that they want to support it, they just don't want to commit silicon to it. So how they supported AVX 256 by splitting up into two AVX 128 commands, essentially. Chances are we'll probably see that again. That's the most likely way that AMD is going to implement AVX 512. And okay, it provides some acceleration for the workloads that can use it, but how much adoption of AVX 512 are we going to have? The one thing I've been banging on at Intel since they launched it is, well, keep giving me a list of how many programs are using it and how much is worthwhile. And some of them they can't talk about because it's HPC and I guess nuclear simulation for Department of Defense. But
I would, to play devil's advocate when they do that kind of stuff,
sure.
I would assume that the audience that is looking for benchmarks on this stuff, the people who work at DoD and are looking at these sort of physics, would know what they need, and they wouldn't need you to explain to them what they need. They just need results that are in AVX512.
Well, and they would have a direct line to Intel's CEO to ask for said feature, which is probably why we got them in Intel chips so quickly, right?
And they've been testing it for 6 months before we even knew that it existed anyway. So
yep.
Yeah.
But in terms of Zen 4 performance, if you've got more transistors, then we go down the route of large caches, larger micro-op caches, wider execution engines, wider buffers, better branch predictors, so minimizing failed branches. AMD made a big fuss with Zen 2 about its L2 Tage branch predictor. So implementing the latest generation of branch prediction. Intel's usually really proud of its branch predictor, and it won't tell anybody how it works. You have to kind of reverse engineer it, which is hard.
Well, it leaks data. That's how it works, right?
Only if you've got multiple threads, I guess.
Just turn off hyperthreading. You'll be fine.
They tried that for a generation.
So I mean, it's the thing to note is eventually we'll hit an instruction level parallelism limit, and that's where it gets difficult, because you can have all the resources in the world, but if you can't run things faster than the fastest they can run. So if you get to that point, then it's just cores upon cores doing fancy acceleration. But people would argue we're nowhere near that yet, because to be that close, you have to have everything in L1. Everything has to be ready instantly. You have to be extracting as many instructions per clock as possible. And concealed workloads do a bad job of that anyway. That's why when you look at IPC gains, when you compare processors, you have to actually use workloads that actually don't sit around waiting for the processors, because then you won't see any uplift whatsoever. So, whenever AMD or Intel do a launch and they say, average or up to 19% IPC increase, they always do that kind of graph with all the benchmarks, right? And some of it's 40%, some of it's 2%, because that's the nature of the workload. People get stuck on that 90% number. I mean, one of the things we do at Nantec is try and verify that 90% number. But we do understand that some of it's only 2%, and there are optimizations you can do for that, where some you sacrifice performance in some tests to get higher in others. And the good thing about spec is you can't cherry pick.
So, I'm sorry. The other thing that I want to talk to you about is specifically with Alder Lake. That's where my point was going. What do you think about the fact that it's going to have mixed x86 and ARM cores? Do you see that being sort of a more of a thing in the future? Do you see this happening, or do you see this as sort of
they're both x86 cores?
I'm sorry, they're both 86 cores. I'm sorry. Yeah, with the big little format, like the way that Atom and
cores.
So first thing is, I hate the word big little, because that is ARM's technical marketing term for their heterogeneous architecture 5 years ago. Somehow it's stuck around. I just call it heterogeneous, or
describe it, I guess.
hybrid processing, or heterogeneous processing, I guess. Sorry, what was the question? I got stuck on the terminology.
Do you think you'll see this a lot more? Do you think you'll see stuff like this happen? Do you think this will be and do you think this will be really relevant for desktop use?
Useful, yeah.
So my issue, I don't have an issue with heterogeneous computing. It makes sense in the markets that it's obviously succeeded in. The problem I have with Alder Lake is Windows.
Okay.
Right. So we have had heterogeneous computing on Windows for 5 years with the Windows on Snapdragon ecosystem, right? Okay, yes, it's ARM cores, it's not x86 cores. So Windows had to rebuild, on ARM. But Windows 10 was built in mind with processors having a homogeneous CPU layout. It can go to any core. Any workload can go to any core. It's changed a little bit because we've got now preferred cores where workloads tend to go towards, or more efficient cores where workloads prefer to go to. With a heterogeneous design, you have to become so much more accurate with where you put your threads when a workload is requested. And you also have less opportunity for variation between preferred cores, which makes it more, you're compounding the where does a thread go with multiple layers. Whereas with say a standard Core i7 7700K, you have 4 homogeneous cores and it can go anywhere, and all cores will turbo. That's one layer, and everything does it. With hybrid architectures, you really have to manage that properly, and Windows 10 wasn't built for it. And Microsoft's been working with Qualcomm to get it right for years. I mean, the Windows on Snapdragon platform, while really good for battery life, has other issues. Namely, Google Drive file stream doesn't work properly. I really need that for my work. But
I've tried using those devices. I can't. I'm gonna be honest with you.
Apple really showed them up with those M1 Max, man.
Well, so Apple works because they control their own software ecosystem.
Yeah,
it's. I would argue it's the software ecosystem, right? Because they can fully redesign Mac OS from the ground up under a completely different paradigm, and people will just think it's another update.
Yep.
And it just works. With Microsoft, it tends to come piecemeal. Nobody wants to download another 20 gigabyte Windows update. What's this? You can't simply go, well, okay, Windows 20H2 is for modern cores, and Windows 21H1 or 22H2 when they might get this sorted out. That's the one you need for heterogeneous compute. When it comes out, it's going to be a bugger to test. It's going to be a problem for benchmarkers, because how do you ensure that your workload that you're benchmarking is on the cores you want?
I think that's part of why it will be so interesting, and you can point out that this is kind of what you're walking into,
Well, so the correct answer for benchmarking is you set your processor affinity.
I mean, yeah.
But
and
average home user is not going to go and pin their processor.
I think that would be the fun thing to do, though, is to compare doing that with also running the thing out of the box and seeing how good Windows is at flubbing it up.
Well, yeah, it's take your Cinebench score. You have your minimum, so you just run it on the small cores. You have your maximum, you just run it on the big cores, and then you have the what is it out of the box. So now, my testing and your testing is just
it's even more.
Yeah.
And what do you do about overclocking?
What's overclocking?
You don't overclock these. What?
It's that I have to the smart way to do it is to remove it. The second smart way to do it is only allow it on the big cores.
The smart thing for a lot of people is to just not get involved with it. But for people like, you and me, we probably can't avoid it.
Enable PBO and boost, and you'll be fine.
PBO. Nice.
Another problem for me is that Alder Lake, as far as we know, it's an 8+8 design, right? Which is effectively an 8-core design for performance.
Yeah.
So,
the rumors I've heard is there will be some SKUs that don't have the small cores, SKUs that have half the small cores or something.
But even then, if you're comparing it to the competition, well, they're on 16 cores.
True cores, yeah.
So and Intel's come out with a 10-core desktop chip, so they're now staying on 8 cores. They're going to market it as a 16-core chip, but performance, it's an 8-core chip. And it will always be.
Yeah, here's kind of the problem that you have with that when you're benchmarking. Do you compare it to the competitor's 8-core chip or the competitor's 16-core chip, or do you compare it with the one that's priced competitively, which is probably going to be the 16-core or the 12-core.
For Intel, they're going to want it. They're going to want you to compare it to whatever they can beat. That's just
everybody does that though.
Yeah.
That's just
my answer is compare it to the 8-core.
Mhm.
My immediate answer. That's what I'd say.
Right.
But it's
a lot of other factors that come into play.
I mean, it could very well that there's a 16-core chip coming and whatever. We don't know about it yet.
So I've got a question from Nomon. He messaged me privately for this one. We
keep ignoring him.
Yep. We blocked him. That's what happened.
That's what super chats are for, right?
Are you giving staff special stream privileges now?
Well, that's why you're here, right?
So the question that he had was, what do you think of the NVIDIA and ARM acquisition, and do you think that ARM is the future? Noamon is our mobile guy, so
yeah,
he's pretty big on the ARM is the future.
So.
It's well, I mean, when it was officially announced, I had my reservations because Jensen doesn't like to play nice with license IP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you remember that NVIDIA had the Acera modem business that they just wanted to license out, and they just kind of tried to be like an IP troll kind of thing with it, and it just died, and nobody wanted it, and and they've had their own Tegra stuff and whatever. So the only way I think the acquisition would work is if Jensen was hands off, kind of like in the way that AMD has said that they'll be hands off with Xilinx when that goes through, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's all we've seen that there's obviously regulatory issues now with NVIDIA and ARM, and GraphCore of all people are complaining. GraphCore is an AI chip company based in Bristol in the UK. Mm-hmm. Nice people. I've met with them a few times. It just seems a bit weird that they're the ones that are initially objecting. Kind of canary in a cage, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So there are reservations where there are actually clear regulatory issues. What it means for NVIDIA is if they do code. I mean, NVIDIA chips already have tons of ARM cores in microcontrollers, and has NVIDIA been playing RISC-V? Who knows? So I mean, they're already an IP licensee. They've probably even got an architecture license. Mm-hmm. So, and you could say, well, they could have moved on and put ARM cores in their GPUs already. So I don't think anything changes on that front. The fact that they've purchased the company. So people saying, well, NVIDIA's not going to, if NVIDIA doesn't support x86 anymore and tries to do its own route and muscle into the market against Intel, and I don't see it happening. I felt it was a weird purchase. I mean, ARM makes money. There's no denying that. You could argue that SoftBank tried to make ARM to do too much, and that's why they're now offloading it, because they need the money back. I remember speaking to ARM people back when the SoftBank acquisition was just announced, and I said, well, what is SoftBank doing with what are you getting a fresh injection of money? And the spokesperson I spoke to said, well, in the past where we had, say, 2 projects on the go, we now can have 7 projects on the go. We won't complete those projects any quicker, but we'll just be able to do more, because it takes 9 months to give birth to a child. You can't just add people to make childbirth quicker, right? 7 men filling a bath with 6 pails, whatever. So the best situation for the market is if NVIDIA purchased ARM, or if it goes through and then just left them to their own devices and just gave them some extra money. Because
I would hope that's what happens. I'm a little suspicious.
So that becomes the question of whether or not NVIDIA just sees ARM as another revenue stream to leave at its own devices and keep running, or if they actually want to see some vertical integration happen within NVIDIA.
I'm sure there's some synergies to be done between R&D.
Sure.
But I would argue, they're two different product lines, and they can go down that route. One of the big drivers for ARM and NVIDIA together recently has been CUDA on ARM.
Mm-hmm.
So enabling high performance computing with using NVIDIA GPUs but ARM CPUs.
Mm-hmm.
So we're now seeing those sorts of servers come into the market, particularly at the more of the hyperscalers. But machine learning, you no longer need to buy a $25,000 56 core Intel CPU or one of their 10 grand ones. You can buy Ampere's Ultra 80 core ARM Neoverse N1 chip, which is the competitor to Amazon's Graviton 2.
Right.
And both those companies have multi-year roadmaps for their processors, and there are other things coming in as well. So it's that was going to happen anyway, regardless of the acquisition. So
yeah, because NVIDIA is an ARM license holder. They didn't need to buy ARM in order to continue to use their design.
It's what you could argue is that if they went and put, say, the equivalent of a smartphone SoC inside an Ampere GPU,
mm-hmm.
so you wouldn't need a host processor like an x86 processor, right? You could argue they would have done that without needing to purchase them. But what purchasing has done is put them in contact with all of ARM's partners who do that sort of stuff, right?
Yes.
So maybe there's an ARM partner out there which makes sense to work with to put that SoC equivalent in the GPU. But then they could have purchased that company without having to purchase ARM. You see where I'm going here?
It may just be that if they're planning to integrate ARM more into their into their GPUs, you wouldn't want it to just be a situation of, well, ARM could just decide to completely change how they do things. But even then,
you can control the roadmap if you own them, which helps.
Yeah. Well,
but
wouldn't it be like a profit thing as well? If they know they're going to do something fairly groundbreaking and it could cause ARM to gain a lot of revenue, then wouldn't you want to get into them while they're cheaper to purchase?
Could do. I mean, it could also be like a patent thing. Like NVIDIA wants to use some patents, and rather than cross-license or just license them, they just purchase the company.
Like
that's the thing.
And Radeon?
Yeah, and C Micro as well. But don't forget, NVIDIA just purchased Mellanox, right? And you could argue, well, NVIDIA and Mellanox could have just worked together to design those Bluefield DPUs, which I think is actually a Mellanox product just renamed. So this is all sort of using GPUs and inter-network connectivity inside the data center. Purchasing them means that they kind of have said, well, okay, we want this technology to ourselves. None of our competitors can use it. You can't do that with ARM because ARM's model is licensing. They don't sell products; they sell licenses.
Yep.
So it's a completely different sort of acquisition that way. So that's how I see this acquisition of ARM. ARM has to go somewhere because SoftBank don't want them. I would argue that while NVIDIA has the money, I worry that NVIDIA will interfere too much.
I wish Jim was here to start yelling.
Why?
I mean, have you seen some of Jim's videos on NVIDIA and their business practices?
I've seen a video of him pointing at a PC case.
It's a great video, by the way.
It's now an emoji on the Discord.
Yep.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
It's the one I use the most.
We did great effort on retrieving that picture.
It's deep somewhere in the channel if you guys are willing enough to try to find it somewhere. We won't give you a gift, but we'll give you like a thumbs up.
Become Patreon members, and you too can use the Jim pointing at a PC case emoji.
So the final question I kind of wanted to ask is a question that we've been hearing about for 10 years now, 15 years now, because silicon is always right on the edge, and we're always getting ready to find all these new things that are going to be better than silicon. What do you think is after silicon? And how long do you think that is?
I will quote Jim Keller and simply
Okay.
say, they'll work it out. that is literally his answer. You know, people predicting the end of Moore's law for 20, 30 years. No, they just work it out. That literally his response if you ask him that. So, I mean, silicon is silicon. It's all about what you put in it and what you put around it that matters. You know, and we've had, you know, high K metal gate and FinFET, and we're moving to gate all around FETs.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the really fun conferences I go to are the really technical silicon manufacturing ones, because they talk about 3.5 transistors, they talk about 2D transistors. 2D transistors are fascinating because you get something like a molybdenum sulfide sheet, MOS2. So you think of molecules as just bouncing around, and then you think of solids as being massive arrays of molecules. This is the chemist coming out in me. MOS2,
PhD guy coming out.
MOS2 is literally 2 atoms high, and it forms like a truss structure, like on a bridge.
Okay.
But it's completely flat, like a graphite. But you can use it like a transistor material.
Wow.
So, and that, somebody's going to correct me. They've got that down to 0.25 nanometers.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
The question is, can you build it properly? Can you build it at scale? Does it have the right properties to be a transistor? Can you enable it and drive it with the same currents to get the same performance as current silicon, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's lots of... Semiconductors is one of those industries where if you have a replacement technology, it has to be as good as what it's replacing.
Yes.
The thing is, what it's replacing has had 30, 40 years of optimizations.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's hard to just come out and beat it.
Yeah, it's you have to. It would be easier to come out with some of these things if we were only 10 years into the semiconductor journey, because then, yeah. So sometimes I think some of these new techniques will only come about once we do reach that end of silicon. But like I say, things like 2D transistors are already being looked into.
Photons instead of electrons, carbon nanotubes.
So, one video I want to make is about a company that I actually interviewed after Hot Chips last year. Not interviewed, I just had a meeting with. I won a $50 Amazon gift card in their raffle, so I thought, I might as well listen to them for 20 minutes. You know, it's like timeshares or whatever.
How many of those are at Hot Chips?
What, companies or Amazon vouchers?
Just people giving stuff away like that.
I only saw 2 and I won both, so I'm quite happy.
Nice.
Actually,
I'm
I'm pretty sure I was the only one that entered. But so this company, they're called Zero EC. So you remember when AMD launched first gen EPYC, and they were talking about energy transfers between the Zeppelin dies and trying to minimize the power of transfer. Mm-hmm. Do you by chance remember what those numbers were?
No.
Not at all.
So they were talking in terms of anywhere from 2 to 9 petajoules per bit.
Okay.
So tiny amount of energy to transfer one bit of data. Well, obviously you're transferring megabytes, so it scales up by 9 orders of magnitude. Yeah. If you do the math on what energy an electron takes to transfer across a wire, you can work out how many electrons you have to transfer for that 1 bit. Mm-hmm. And it's anywhere in the order of 10,000 to over 1 million, right? This company was saying that they can create channels where they can transfer a bit with 1 electron, or less than 100 at least. They designed a technology where they could transport an electron in a vacuum and it register the voltage change required to identify a bit. So arguably reducing connectivity power by a factor of 1 million. Now, there's just two problems with their technology. So they designed the vacuum, essentially the sub 1 nanometer vacuum in silicon, and they had, because obviously you imagine an electron as a particle, it's just going to bounce around in that space. So they had a coating which would keep the electron internal. They'd also managed to design it so it can go around corners as well, which is fantastic. The only two problems they had were generating the electrons and detecting the electrons.
Oh, that's it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right. So they could do it with massive, semiconductor massive structures, which don't scale to millions of transistors or millions of wires. And they said, the goal of going to hot chips is to discuss with companies or with press, to enable them to, develop partnerships that could help miniaturize this technology. Because obviously, one of the big things with AMD's Threadrippers and Epics, and we'll see with Intel, I'm sure, is that they're spending so much energy transferring data, they can't use the energy for compute. Every watt you use on I/O, you can't use it on compute.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can reduce I/O by a factor million to essentially nothing, then
That's a
you
big
suddenly
deal.
have,
Yeah, that's a big deal.
this is a I think it was a startup coming out of university, which these things invariably are. So,
I mean, the thing that I always respected about engineers is they'll hear some really interesting thing. They'll be like, yeah, so how can I scale it to actually put it in something? It's like, yeah, that's really interesting, but how do I make it work?
That I would argue that's a productization engineer.
Mm-hmm.
An engineer is like, ooh, cool, how does that work? Productization engineer is, ooh, cool, how do you make money?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's I mean, those are two entirely different types of people. And to put this to the extreme, I know at one motherboard manufacturer that's their lead BIOS engineer still develops BIOSes using a 1024 by 768 CRT.
So that's why BIOS always look terrible.
It's because he's been doing it for 20 years, 25 years. And that's what he's comfortable with, and he doesn't want to change because... Yeah.
Can you say that resolution again? Because I haven't heard that
1024 by
resolution.
768.
Wow. I haven't heard that resolution in a long time.
You should read some of my benchmarks. I benchmark at that resolution.
Oh, I don't read your stuff, no.
So,
it's like
actually,
an old 4x3, isn't it? So
before we go, I do want to mention this because, I mean, Jim is kind of known for hating 720p benchmarks.
Yeah.
He's known for them.
So why do I do them?
No, I think I have an idea why you do them, but explain to the audience why you do them.
Because you're a shill.
Oh, right. Yeah, because I'm a big shill for low pixel. No, so
low pixel, big pharma.
Low pixel, yeah.
I'm such a nerd.
It's what's the art that's involved in low pixel stuff? Low poly art or whatever. Yeah. I actually quite like that. So the reason I test is, so I mean, I mentioned I've been doing benchmarking for 10 years, on the motherboard and on the CPU stuff, and there's always a question of, well, when you test a CPU, do you test some games at some resolutions with some GPUs, or do you do like 12 GPUs on one game? On how many resolutions do you do, and what is it? And are you trying to show differences in CPU, or are you trying to show realistic workloads? And over the years, I'd seen people do these low resolution benchmarks, and I was like, yeah, no relevance to real world, what have you? What's the point in doing them? I got enough requests over time, and I got my automation to a point where I can just say, oh yeah, I'll just add that to the list, and it just runs. So I mean, in my gaming tests, I run 4 different resolution quality settings, one of which is low resolution, low quality. If people don't like to see those numbers, they can ignore them. The argument, I'm sure I've had this argument with you, is where some readers, some viewers, they want 100% of benchmarks to be relevant to them. They don't want any extraneous data. Whereas you have other people that say, can you test my niche case? And they just want that one piece of data. And you'll have, and I always say, look, what you care about, pay attention to. The rest is just noise. So if you don't like that test, ignore it. Unfortunately, there are still people who want 100% of the data to be relevant to them. And I'm sorry, that's just not possible. You're not that special. Sorry.
Well, then there's
you're one person out of, tens of thousands of people at any given time reading any of your articles.
Who want 100% of the data to say the story they want told, or to have the result they want to see. So, if benchmarking at a low resolution makes X product look good, then do it. If it makes X product look bad, then don't.
Well, one of the issues I have is that some people say, well, you test too many edge cases. You're not showing, you're not spending enough of your benchmarks on the mainstream, the average user, and you're going after all these little niche use cases. My argument there is it's changed in the last 10 years, 5-10 years. People want individual tests for their very specific workload. It's the reason why I run 6 rendering workloads is because people use different software. Gone are the days where people will look at just one number for a generic piece of software and say, oh, that applies to me. This is why you see different scaling with V-Ray, Corona, Cinebench, and or I do a benchmark where I run Crisis on a CPU. All different sorts of scaling in rendering, and that's just how it is these days. So, sorry, rant. That's my rant.
I heard you mention Cinebench, but that's not a real-world benchmark, so I don't know why.
Are you sure? 0.26% of people use Cinema 4D. But I mean, it's that. I mean, when Intel first said, performance, real world performance matters. I even have a real world performance T-shirt. Maybe I should have worn that. It's blue as well. The response from all the press in the room was basically, well, look, this is a representative workload, not a specific workload. For the because depending on how many tests people are doing, right? It's out of all that data, how many people are running a rendering workload? Oh, well, it's about 13%. Well, this is a representative example of a rendering workload. So we're not catering to 0.26% with this test. We're catering to 13% of people with this test. And that's kind of where, agree to disagree, I think, between Intel and the press in the room. And, don't get me wrong, Intel is for the smart people. And having constructive discussions with them is way more important than having antagonizing discussions with them.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Even if you post a Rocket Lake review 3.5 weeks early.
So, I kind of got disconnected there for a second again, because today is just not right for me. One of the things I wanted to kind of talk about is when Jim talked about that in his video. I think in some of your cases, specifically with the Ryzen stuff last gen, I think a lot of because I've seen a lot of people test at lower resolution for that that processor. A lot of people also did not have a 3090 or a 3080, or they were testing last gen stuff.
Yeah.
I saw a bunch of people testing with 2070 supers and whatnot and whatever they could get a hand on, because supply was so bad, because sampling wasn't out to everybody. So I think to a certain degree it's really understandable, especially in those situations, for people to do that. If you're testing on a 2060 and the highest thing out there is a 3090, I mean 1080p max is going to be bottlenecked on every CPU you try.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's when I do CPU reviews, one of the biggest comments I get is, you're not using the top end GPU, so why should I care looking at your gaming tests at all? And the answer is, well, I test multiple systems at once, so I need more than one card. I'm the CPU reviewer, not the GPU reviewer, so trying to get one card is difficult. Trying to get 3 cards is like, trying to find hen's teeth. So, and then
never heard that one before.
Because that's a British saying. Because I update my test bed once every 18 months, that's kind of the cycle I go for. And sometimes I can't get hold of 3 GPUs.
Especially
I
times
think,
like now.
so I'm still running 2080 Ti's, and people are complaining I'm not running 3090s.
Mm-hmm.
The 2080. So I'm just trying to think. I ran GTX 580s. I got them from ECS. They sent me 3.
Oh wow!
I run,
ECS made graphics cards. Like I haven't heard that in a long time.
I then went to GTX 770s, and MSI sent me 3 of their Lightnings.
I remember those.
That was nice. Then I had GTX 1080. No, I went through a period where I had AMD cards from Sapphire, the R9 290X and the RX 480. That was in a time where I was testing multiple GPUs.
Yes, you were.
Then I went
one of the
to
few guys that did that.
It's a pain. It really is. Drivers get messed up so easily. And then I went. I'm looking at my cards up here because they're all on the shelf. MSI sent me 3 of their GTX 1080s standard gaming cards. And then I got one NVIDIA Founders Edition from, I think, so our GPU editor, I think he had 2, so he sent me 1. And then NVIDIA were kind enough to send me another 2. But yeah, no, it's harder during low stock levels to get them. I'm not changing my test suite probably for at least another year, just because it's a pain to retest everything, because people still want Sandy Bridge test benchmarks and Broadwell benchmarks and Bulldozer benchmarks, and well, I guess not so many for those. Phenom 2 X6 benchmarks, and then Ryzen 1000, then Ryzen 2000, Ryzen 3000, Ryzen 5000, then Threadripper 1000, Threadripper 2000, then high-end desktop,
and then the specific chips that nobody bought, like the 1400.
What?
The Ryzen 1400 or 1500X.
I probably have a super rare chip on my desk.
Of course you do.
Athlon 2 X4 638K. Celeron G1820 Ti. I mean, so the whole point of my CPU overload test of testing all x86 CPUs was that someone somewhere is running this stuff and they want to compare now with then. And you're never going to find a CPU that's, if you Google search, you don't know what's 100 megahertz different. So the fact that there are 84 different Haswell CPUs doesn't help you. And this, unless you find a number it's specifically for your CPU, or you just upgrade anyway.
It's a really cool idea. The reasoning behind it. It's a really cool idea. It's helping people who don't know what they're doing. Yeah, it's great.
I'm pretty sure if I had an intern, we could get 6 or 7 processes done a day. So I mean, I do CPU tests and GPU tests on almost everything. I don't do GPU tests on Celerons and Pentiums because there's no point. I don't do GPU tests on Xeons, and I'm undecided on high-end desktop because I haven't done many of those yet. But yeah, no, if I had an intern, I could probably knock out 6, 7 a day because they run overnight, right? So.
So the last thing I wanted to kind of touch on was your YouTube channel, which is Tech Potato.
Self-promotion, love it.
Yeah. And people can of course find you on AnonTech, and on Twitter is what is your Twitter at again?
My at is at Ian Cutress.
Okay.
Or at Tech Potato. I mostly use the Ian Cutress one. That's where you'll find me most. It's when I was younger, I used to do the whole forum thing, which I guess is now transformed into the Discord thing. I find I get too bogged down in conversations if I follow it too much, and it just takes too much time away. Twitter's just more of a instant glut, and you can see my memes there.
It totally happens here with the Discord for the Patreon donators. So I know exactly what you mean about it taking too much time. But we love those guys.
I mean, I'm in the AdoredTV Discord, so if somebody ats me, I will see it. I don't like the fact that Discord I have to scroll to find where I'm mentioned, because sometimes
there's a tool in the search I could show you where you could find where your mentions are.
I'm getting so old. This is why I don't understand all of Discord's how to do option.
These damn kids and their damn Discord.
Back scrolling 20, 50, 100 messages to get the context.
Oh. Yeah. So.
Hey, at least the reply feature shows you the comment that they're replying to. So
they fixed that. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
So hopefully they hit reply to something and then do an @ for you, so you get the context chain.
I've actually seen you reply to some messages that you've gotten, Ian, and you're very cordial.
Aggressive. Well, it depends who it is.
Well, there were some people.
I stand my ground. I stand my. This is a stand your ground Discord.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, going back to the topic of tech potato. So I have a couple of interviews coming up over the next few weeks. I've already done one of them. That was really, really interesting. Can't say who it's with yet. I've got a few people that I want to interview on that list as well. Content-wise, I'm sure at some point I'm going to do some tech ASMR. So that should be quite good. You'll just hear me reading off CPU specifications.
With a GTX fan blowing in the background.
Oh, can you hear that? I meant to be on RTX voice.
No, we can't.
Through a couple of times, so that's.
Well, I can't hear it most of the time. I've got to say though, in terms of very like thread, what do you call it, thumbnails? Yours are not that bad. I respect.
Not that bad.
They're not that bad. I especially like the. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that I have a thumbnail where I said this CPU is terrible. Thanks, Obama. I got about 5 messages saying, "Why are you bringing Obama into this?" It's like, do you not know the meme?
Yeah, right.
It's like, I don't care. I don't find it funny.
Not know? Also, I got to say, I like that it got more views than a couple of the other ones that are right next to it. So it clearly worked. A lot of people got the meme.
Well, that's the sad part, though, is when you could memeify your thumbnail that doesn't have much relevance, but get more views out of it, and so people do it because it works. And that
I wonder how far I'm going to go and how many on fire graphics card am I going to have in the background of my my thumbnails.
I'm sure everyone knows the top 2 people we're talking about with their thumbnails.
It's Linus said in one of his videos that with a good thumbnail, your views increase 20%, and I fully believe that.
It's true.
It's true.
My favorite one though is how not to shill. The video is actually pretty good. If that's the one that I'm thinking of, it's about the connection with press and stuff,
ethics and journalism and
it's really
journalism to be
what I really like about it though is the $signs and the 3DFX tattoo on your neck.
Oh, I
so
that wasn't my idea, but it's says I originally had Intel AMD logos in there, and I thought, let's go for something a bit more retro.
No, it's great. You just needed the gold teeth coming out, and yeah.
I know I'm British, mate. They're yellow enough.
I've just got to say one thing about the British thing. When you said, "What's all this?" then a part of me laughed inside because that's my favorite English just sort of saying.
You got to do it in a proper Cockney accent, though. What's all this then?
Yep.
You walk in, you see a bunch of people benchmarking. Hey, what's all this then?
Yeah. Hello. What's all this then?
I'm sorry. You got to go ahead.
Yeah. But no, it's future videos on the channel. I also want to. I recently did a video about Intel Labs. Their neuromorphic, their quantum, their silicon photonics research. They actually sent me one of their neuromorphic boards to show off. I mean, it's a dead board, but it's got the chips on it, and I kind of want to do a show hands-on with that. Speak about the silicon photonics is a next generation of interconnect that I think is worth talking about. I'm not sure I'll explain the science bit very well, but I think explaining the computing bit very well might be on the cards. So
okay, and just a last sort of parting shot. You have RGB gaming speaker shoes on the channel, so people should check that out just for what the hell is going on kind of thing. I recommend you guys check that out.
They make you run faster.
Today I've learned that Alex
If
is
they're
a
red.
really big Tech Potato fan.
I mean, you'd be surprised how much I listen to this in the background. You guys would be surprised.
It all depends how much you take it in, though. That RGB shoes is arguably one of the worst viewed videos on my channel, which just goes to show that posting crap doesn't necessarily help.
But like an AMD bike.
Oh man.
AMD,
Yeah,
I'm working on my AMD bike review, but the drivers they keep crashing.
Learn how to drive then.
Yeah.
That was
if you
not.
watched Gamers
That was
Nexus video, he kept crashing too, but it wasn't his fault when the chain
Well,
was off rail.
Well, he crashed a bit too much, then decided not to ride the bike again, did he?
Yeah.
Well, he had to fix it just to make it safe.
That's literally reviewing company merch. Maybe there should be a review company merch channel.
The weird thing
review
is,
a hoodie.
is the AMD bike isn't actually AMD merch. I think it's like somebody else makes it for
It's
the.
a branded Walmart bike, yeah. With stickers.
I mean, but processors are one of the few things that aren't made somewhere else that are rebranded, right?
Yeah.
I would review though the MSI plushie dragons. I would totally review those things. They're kind of cool. You have one, don't you? All I got was a silly Zotac T-shirt. I went to CES and all I got was a silly Zotac T-shirt.
I mean, I have this Core 2 Extreme Inside beer warmer.
I wanted as a final
a decade old.
As a final nerd thing, I really wanted the Intel Extreme Core skull shirts that they had for Intel Gaming. It had the Intel skull logo. You remember the Intel Extreme skull logo?
Yeah.
They still use it sometimes. I think they used it just on
Devil's Canyon. No, Skull Canyon.
Okay.
One of the Enthusiast Nooks. They still use it on the Nook Enthusiast line. No, they sent me a couple of Superfin t-shirts. I always have to be wary about which t-shirt I'm wearing on a video.
Like the Super Nintendo one?
Yeah. I think this is fairly neutral, even though I don't know. I was a Sega guy though.
Sega does.
I was a Sega guy too.
I'm wrapping one of my more favorite games.
I actually recompleted that last year. That's because I was going for Steam achievements, but
I didn't. We can't see the shirt, Kirk.
It's the
I know you guys can't, but it's on stream if you wanted to see it.
We need to get Kirk a secondary webcam so we could see him during these things.
It's Kirk. OBS has a stream cam feature where you can change it into a webcam so you can record with it and show it.
Well, no, I'm in a different software so that I can green screen myself.
That's right.
Because you can't share your webcam between two applications simultaneously.
You can with OBS. That's what I'm saying.
I think we talked about this last time you wore the shirt, Kirk.
Well, you can with OBS, yes, but OBS doesn't do auto green screening. Unless if everyone wants to see my messy office. But of course, I guess Ian gives me confidence I should probably do so.
Well, hold on. To be fair,
the solution to your problems is NVIDIA Broadcast. Just get yourself an RTX card.
This
RTX
works just as well, which is
you can see he's about to get a $1,400 check. Maybe he can afford one.
Hey, no, I'm married, so I get 28.
Nice.
Yeah.
So the thing I was going to point out though was Ian's background is cool though because it's boxes of motherboards on a nice shelf.
Mine has a weight
It's just
bench,
tech stuff.
So I don't think anyone cares to see that.
I personally think my blue freshly painted wall is very nice.
Yeah.
I like my green screen so you can't see all the junk in the background.
We can see your chair though.
Can you now? Ooh.
It blends out when you're not directly in front of it.
Yeah.
No, yeah, so I mean, I think we've shilled everything that we need to shill. I think we've covered all the bases that we need to cover, and I think we had a really interesting discussion with the doctor over here.
You don't want to shill things like nimble storage or.
I mean, listen, if
I'm enterprise,
hold on,
I get all the more fancy stuff.
Just-
Veeam, who knows?
Hey, if Nimbus Data sends me a few of the 100 terabyte drives, I'll happily shill for them.
Hey, I wouldn't mind that for Synology sending me their rebranded Toshibas.
they're not rebranded. They're just optimized for Synology.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
They do have their own custom firmware.
They use the Gigabyte Gauntlet for selection.
Hey, at least they're not rebranded Seagates.
So
Seagate, send me a drive.
the one thing for anybody listening, if they do want to advertise, if they do want free advertising, if you get us graphics cards for our own testing, I will happily shill them in every podcast.
Dictionary.com just added the word SpawnCon for sponsored content to their dictionary.
SpawnCon. Nice.
SpawnCon.
I will.
Nobody
It
has
doesn't
ever
sound
said
like. No. It's.
I will absolutely do SpawnCon with CPU benchmarking.
It's
for some of the
I'm pretty sure that's a
testimonials.
euphemism. You know, do you do SpawnCon? Huh?
Are you
That sounds like a
goer?
different kind of euphemism. But yeah, so anybody listening, feel free. We have to buy our cards right now in the current situation. At inflated prices.
My solution is review CPUs
There you go.
and buy really old Celerons.
Listen. I review CPU.
And we lost him.
No, you don't.
He reviews CPU.
You should review some router or something, man.
Yeah.
No, I'd personally love to review some more enterprise stuff. I actually ran some ad hoc benchmarks on a vSAN for VMware. Maybe I should put an article up about those off-the-cuff ones. Give it a slight comparison versus some lower-ish SAN performance. All right, since Alex is probably not coming back in time, we should probably go ahead and wrap this. Be sure to check out Tech Potato, hit the alarms for not just us, but him as well. Check out our Twitters, follow us. Of course, you have a Patreon, right, Ian?
Yeah, Patreon/Tech Potato. All of my tiers are related to CPUs, so it's not my fault if you choose the bulldozer tier. I suggest going for something a bit higher. Your performance will directly increase with the size of your Patreon. So
there you go. And
there's a special Lisa Sue tier as well.
Yep, a golden tier for sure. And even a bulldozer equivalent on our Patreon will get you into our Discord as well. You can at least get that and get invited. So sure to check those out. And check out the websites, Anantech, AdoredTV.com. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Ian, and Donnie and Alex, of course. And we will see you in the next one.
We'll leave it there. Be sure to like and subscribe.